Hi guys, I'm Wendy from Stoneflow Designs. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make food art, specifically donuts. Donuts, resin donuts. Who would have thought that was a thing? Well, I'm not going to lie, when I started seeing donuts in my Instagram feed, my initial reaction was, why? But the more I saw them, the more intrigued I became. And just really, it was more about trying to solve the problem of figuring out the icing that I embarked on the journey of making the donuts. But the further along I went in the making of the donuts, the more I kind of really started to like them. And then, well, I kind of love them now. I'm really quite happy with the donuts, with how they've turned out. I would describe my version as more of a conservative pop art. This one is a Tiffany blue and silver with a sparkly donut. You can't really see the sparkle very well in this lighting, but it is pretty sparkly. I'll show you some photos along the way. And this one is my favorite. This is black and gold with 24 karat gold covered fondant icing. It is quite fancy, I would say, and beautiful. I'm very happy with how that turned out. I'm happy with how both of them turned out, actually. Like I said, sometimes for me, it's just about solving a problem. And the problem to solve here was, how in the world do you make this icing on a resin donut? You can't use resin. Resin does not work that way. So I needed to come up with a plan, a different substance. I'm not going to say it's the only way, because I'm sure there's many other ways that you can do something like this. But the way that I found is mixing Mod Podge with a multi-purpose sealant. I'll put both of these in the description so that you can purchase them if you're interested in making it. But as you mix it, it becomes the consistency of icing. And then you can just pipe it on just like you normally would the icing. Once it was dry, I added the 24 karat gold leaf and the silver. I'm not gonna lie, the process of adding the 24 karat gold and the silver leaf took hours and hours and hours, far too long. So I'm not gonna make any more donuts. These are the only two donuts in existence. There are two smaller ones though. I did make two smaller ones, but these are the larger ones that I love. And I won't be making any more. I love how they've turned out. So without further ado, I will get stuck into how these were made. I'll give you the full run through of the process. All the products that I used in the video will be listed in the comments.
All right, so I started with a 12-inch by 12-inch wood canvas board, or wood panel board, it's not canvas. That's about 30.5 centimeters square. I'm just covering it with the foil. In this video you can see the gold foil. I took the backing off entirely to cover this one. I wouldn't normally do that, but the size of the foil was the tiniest bit larger than the size of the canvas or the board, and I found it incredibly difficult to line it up so that I could slowly peel off the backing. So in the end, I just ripped it off, and it actually worked out perfectly fine. I was able to, as you can see, put the foil on without any bubbles or any gaps on the sides. There's just a tiny bit over the edges that needed to be trimmed off. A bit of a tip for you if you haven't done this already, if you are needing to trim pieces off of something using a Stanley knife, it's really helpful if you have a piece of plexiglass or something like that underneath. It just allows the knife to sort of have a bit of a cushion to absorb into, and helps you cut on the line that you're looking for. Now I'm just adding some black paint. This is just basic black acrylic paint. I'm adding it to the edges of the board and the underside as well. Don't stress too much if it's getting on the foil. In the first instance, I used some isopropyl alcohol to get it off, but it turns out I didn't even need that. It comes straight off of the foil edge, so there's no concern there. As you can see, there you go. Wipe it off. So I just covered the edges with the black paint, which I will then tape over so that the resin doesn't get onto the black paint of the edge, because I want the edge to be more of a matte finish and the top of the piece to be glossy, glittery, sparkly. All right, now I'm just making the resin donuts, just using clear resin with some sparkles. I've got some donut molds, silicone molds that I've ordered off of Amazon. I'm just filling them almost to the top because I want to put two different pieces together. The bottom piece is actually made out of just resin mixed with white pigment paste. And the reason for that is because I don't want to be able to see through the entire donut. I want the sparkles just to shimmer on their own without the risk of the Tiffany blue or the black coming through the donut itself. The ones that you can see here are all just the glittery, sparkly tops. Now I'm just working on the tops of the boards. I'm adding some clear resin and some pigmented resin. So I'm using pigment paste for both of these, black pigment paste and Tiffany blue from Just Resin. Now I'm just doing the tops in clear and the bottoms with the color because I want to allow the silver and the gold to show through, but I just want to create a bit of lacing using the pigment paste and moving the pigmented resin into the clear, which causes some lacing. And that's simply due to the fact that the resin with the pigment paste weighs more than the clear resin. So as you push it into the clear, it floats on top of the clear and then sinks through, which creates that beautiful cells and lacing. Also the basis of an ocean wave, pushing the white resin over the clear, and it falls through and creates that beautiful ocean wave. So I'm just using the heat gun to blow it across. I've used the heat gun to warm up the resin in the first instance because it moves a lot better when it's warm. This little one, I think I worked it a little bit too much with the heat gun, and it started to affect the foil underneath, which wasn't a big deal, but you'll see later on in the video that there's a few of the corners on the little one that the resin didn't seem to go all the way to. And that was perfectly fine. It was just as a result of the heat gun. In the next coat of the resin, I was able to fill in those gaps pretty easily. So these things do happen sometimes. The heat gun can It's a wonderful tool when it comes to resin, but it can also do some damage if you're not careful. Now I should be wearing gloves on both hands. I don't know why I just have a glove on one hand, but I've got some resin on my hand there. I am using Art Resin. It is the only resin that I use. It has no VOCs. It's a really important factor, I think, to take into consideration when buying resin. It's certainly not the cheapest, but it is the best. That's my opinion, of course. Now I'm just going across with a torch, also a very handy tool when working with resin. This is a cooking one. It's pretty easy to use. It's sort of one of those things that you would get in a kitchen to do the creme brulee. I think it's a chef's torch. I'll see if I can put a link in the description for you if you're interested in getting one of those. Definitely handy to have if you're doing cells or lacing. Any ocean resin, it's almost an absolute must to do ocean resin. Right, now I'm just touching up the edges and I'll pop the bubbles and I'll leave them to dry overnight. All right, so now it's time to put the donuts on the boards. I've got a solid white base topped with a glittery clear donut. The donut on top is actually a matte finish at the moment because the donut molds are actually a matte finish. But don't stress about that because all you need is one coat of clear resin over top of a matte finish resin product and it becomes glossy. So I'm just adding a bit of resin into the center of each donut and putting the tops on, so that glues them into place. But I'm also adding resin over top of the entire donut and the board to glue everything in place. Also making sure that they're centered on the boards. In the first instance, I was just using a ruler to make sure that I found the center point. And now I'm just pouring on some clear resin over top of the donut. If I had different lighting in the room, you would have seen the sparkles really come out with this effect, but unfortunately, the lighting that I'm using in the video, it doesn't really do it justice. So I'll, like I said early on, I'll share some photos so you can see the donuts glittering in the proper lighting. Now I'm just making sure that the donuts are perfectly aligned together, and then I'll top them off with more resin. So this is the second coat of resin. There will be a third and final coat at the end. And as you'll see on that little one in the top right corner, those edges that were that I couldn't seem to fill in with the resin because I had done something with the heat gun are completely filled in once this coat is pushed all the way through to the edges. So don't stress about things like that. Usually when there's slight imperfections, all you need is one more coat of resin and it is perfect again. So I need to get the resin to the edges, but I don't want to tilt the boards too much because I don't want the donuts to slip out of place. So I'm just using a plastic knife to move the resin, and I'm also just digging it out of the center a little bit. I do want some resin in the center, but I don't want it to fill up the hole. It's a key part of being a donut is having a hole in the middle. So I want to make sure that that isn't completely filled with resin, but there is just a little bit in the bottom, just to make sure that that donut is secure in place and isn't going to go anywhere. All right, now we're on to the icing. This is Mod Podge and Flexi Seal. I'll put the link in the description for the products. Now, I have mixed it up at this stage, so I'm just showing you the consistency that you are aiming for when you mix yours, if you are to make it yourself. So you want it to be kind of goopy. You want it to be able to sit on top of your knife pretty easily in a hump or a lump, and then when you tip the knife it falls off like icing. You really just want it to be the consistency of icing. So it is a little bit of add this, add that. I added the Flexi Seal and then continued to add bits, a little bit more of Mod Podge as I would go. So You just need to take your time with it. You're just looking for the right consistency. At this stage, I'm just putting it in a Ziploc bag. Lining a cup makes it quite easy to get the icing into the Ziploc bag, and then cutting the corner of the bag to use as a makeshift piping tool. I'm not much of a baker, so I don't actually have piping tools. This was really my first attempt at doing icing on anything. I'm not very good in the kitchen. But I think that it worked perfectly. It really, it came out exactly how I would expect icing to come out. It was goopy enough that it would drip a little bit, but not so much that it was falling off the donut. So it was exactly the consistency that I was looking for. The only reason I have the knife out is just because using a Ziploc bag to be a piping tool, it has the seam of the bag, which created a bit of a line in the icing, which I was a bit annoyed with and I was trying to fix, but honestly it was absolutely fine in the end. Now that's just one of the smaller donuts. Look at that icing. It is perfect. I'm so thrilled with it. And like I said earlier in the video, I to, I guess, put a shine on the gold and make sure that it's completely adhered to the size, and remove any extra bits, which of course are going everywhere. So it almost looks like I'm performing surgery on this donut with the effort that I've put into trying to cover up the areas that I don't want the gold. Even still, despite my best efforts, there was there was a lot of cleanup required after the gold was added. So personally, I mean, I love 24 karat gold and I will add it wherever I possibly can, but I would recommend, if you were to try and do this yourself, maybe just using a color to the icing would be better. Alternatively, you could try something even more creative, and that would be to try and put the icing itself onto one of the silicone molds, and allow it to dry, add the leafing, then put the icing piece onto the donut, and then add the resin over top to secure it in place. Just a thought, not something that I've tried, but just, in thinking how you could potentially do this as a 24 karat piece of icing without going through the nightmare of getting the gold all over the resin donut. Not too sure. Certainly would be keen to hear your thoughts if you have any ideas of how that could be done easier with a lot less cleanup. Just so you know, the cleanup that I did for the 24 karat gold and the silver leafing that got into areas that I didn't want, I used one of the small brushes and 100% isopropyl alcohol. And it was just a matter of rubbing over the gold over and over and over again, breaking down the gold and removing it. So it was a time-consuming process. I've sped up the video because, well, it was a long video, but as you can see here, the gold is coming along nicely. That's the fluffy brush there that I used to add some shine. Now I am adding the resin over top of the finished silver piece. It really just does wonders to make it sparkle. I'm pouring from one of the smaller pieces onto the large piece, mostly because I just want to get the resin out of the center. So that was the easiest way to do that. And now I'm just adding some more onto this one. I'll do the same with this piece. Once the resin is on, I will tip over the piece and add it onto one of the other ones. I love how that gold has turned up with the resin over top of it. It just looks so beautiful. Just making sure that the resin goes all the way through to the edges, and then I'll run over it with the heat gun and the torch just to get rid of all the bubbles. And making sure that the center is not filled with resin, of course. Just using that knife once again to remove some of the resin, and just make sure that the resin has gone all the way around the donut and got to the underside of the donut as well, just to make sure that that coat is everywhere. Okay, so this is the last part of the process. We've got our finished pieces, but they still have the tape around the edges. So as you can see, I'm just peeling the tape from the bottom, but now around the edge, you really want to try and just warm up the tape just a little bit. Nothing crazy, but just use the heat gun just to do a couple little swipes just to warm that resin so that the tape comes off cleanly And as you can see, that's a perfect edge there. When I did the taping of these boards, I left about a millimeter, maybe 2 millimeters, no, millimeter and a half, just the slightest little edge at the very top, simply so that the resin could seep over just a touch, and the tape would come off cleanly. It actually just creates a really nice look if you leave just the slightest little edge at the top there. So I'm just going over each side with the heat gun and slowly pulling off the tape. And I'm pulling off the tape in a downward motion so that the just to try and make sure that that line comes off perfectly, and making sure that I release it from the bottom as well. If there's any drips on the bottom that came off that adhered to the wood, just use the heat gun to heat up the drips, and paint stripper sort of spatula to try and get those drips off. They come off pretty easily with the heat gun. And as you can see, the last little bit of tape is coming off now. And the paint seemed to be quite good on this one. I do typically always add a second coat of paint just to make sure that it's 100% covered. If there's any bits of the paint that weren't covered, like that little bit there, I just add another coat of paint just to make it perfect.
I hope you enjoyed watching that video of how these beautiful pieces came together. I certainly enjoyed making them. If you're interested in potentially winning one of these, there will be a competition coming soon. I will put the details out on my YouTube channel once they're available, so please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and you will be notified of when that is happening and how to enter. In the meantime, thanks again for watching. I'm Wendy from Stoneflow Designs.